Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the first ever News Directors Roundtable, a National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences San Francisco, Northern California chapter benefit. It is available live to our members only, and I'm your moderator, News Director Nazy, Javid. Thank you for being here with us this Saturday. Welcome. We are so glad to have you all with us. And today we have a panel of industry leaders here to answer your questions live. You can submit questions in the YouTube comments and they will be sent to me, which I will then ask the news directors for you. I also have a list of questions you submitted prior to the event. And of course, we'll get in as many as we can. But first, the introductions. And our first panelist is Stephanie Adrouny. She is the Vice President of News at NBC Bay Area. She also happens to be a Natus 2021 Silver Circle recipient. And our second panelist is Derek Schnell. He is the news director at Kcra 3 in Sacramento. Hey, Derek. Our third panelist is Martin Ortiz, news director at KFSN ABC 30 in Fresno. Hi, Martin. Our fourth panelist is Janice Jin, the news director at KITV 4 in Honolulu, Hawaii. Beautiful dress, Janice. And I'm Nazy, Javid, news director at KAEF ABC 23 in Eureka. So grateful to have you all here with us. And we only have an hour and a half today. We've got so many excellent questions, so we're just going to jump right into it and start this discussion, beginning with the question that I think really helps set up the conversation, and that's this. In the field, we often hear statements like, I don't watch the news, it's too depressing. I don't own a TV. I get my news from other sources. So how does an industry deliver a product that is compelling, informative, nuanced, thought-provoking, and even entertaining enough to actually grow our audience rather than attend to its slow and inevitable decline? And that's a question from Devin Feely. He is a Natus governor and Emmy Award-winning general assignment reporter and MMJ at KPIX. And who would like to take the first shot at an answer? That's a big one.
I'm happy to jump in.
There we go.
Oh, Janice, let's let Janice go.
Well, I was going to say, the first thing you have to remind your viewers is dependability. And I think that when viewers tell us that they don't watch all the time, the question ought to return to them is, when do they watch? We know that viewers want and need information, and they get upset when we don't have what they consider breaking news. So I think part of our job is to first understand and have our viewers understand that when they want dependable information, they come to, in our case, television. And thank you very much. I think our responsibility is to every day deliver dependable information. If we continue to go on the air and act silly, or tell stories that are not consequential to their living, then they don't need to come to watch us. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Janice. Derek?
Yeah, I'll jump in now after Janice there. So, we don't, not all people on the street are worth having a conversation to, but I will tell you, I think the best follow-up question when someone says, oh, no, I don't watch the news, or I get my information from social media is, well, but from whom? Because Facebook is not a source, nor is Instagram, nor is TikTok. You're getting information from someone. So I would be hard pressed to say that there is anyone out there who's not getting some facet of local news. What's important for us to do is to meet the moment, and we have to be on all those platforms. Television is a huge part of what we do. But if we're not there for our audience on all these other platforms where they are, and looking at those ways that we can be there, then that's on us. And that's where we have to keep going as an industry and as journalists out in the field is finding those ways to really connect. And on this notion of that the news is too depressing. There are days that it's heavy, and I don't think anyone would argue that the last 18 months has been all about happy, fun news. But I will tell you that within my newsroom, and I know many newsrooms are doing this, we're all looking for those stories that have impact, that really emphasize community, things that have been reopening. There's a lot of good news that's happening. And, we don't have to beat people over the head and say, hey, here's a fun, silly story. But there are a lot of positive stories that we're covering every day and not always getting credit.
Thank you.
I'll chime in. I think Derek hit the nail on the head with the word impact. That conversation, that word is what we use every day to judge our news coverage. What stories can we cover that are going to have the biggest impact for our BMA and our audience? And I can tell you, just in my 15-year career in Fresno, Bay Area, and now back in Fresno, that conversation has been had more often in the last 5 years than it ever had before. And that's because we know we have to cover impactful stories. Otherwise, the audience simply will not tune in. They're too savvy. They have too much going on. They have too much information on this. So we are competing with these phones. And so we have to be relevant. We have to be impactful, because otherwise the audience will tune us out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I would just add, I think, I agree with what everybody said. We do have to be where people are now. It is not just about television, and we have to be on the platforms where people are looking for news. But I think it's also important to look in our newsrooms. Do we have people who understand the community, tied to the community, reflect the community, right? We can't all come from the same backgrounds. We can't be the same people. We have to be part of the community, so we know what's important to them. And I think if we do that, that leads us to the stories people want to hear about.
Thank you. Stephanie, you bring up a good point. This kind of segues into the next question. This is from Professor Bob Rucker. He's an Addis governor, former CNN correspondent, and former San Jose State University journalism school director. And he asked, seeing people from your own culture on TV news still excites viewers and future media hires, but being heard and supported in story production meetings, which enable us to focus on cultural concerns beyond crime and punishment issues, have a much greater impact. How does each panelist actually enable a timely, unique, and continuous discussion about cultural, community, human interest stories that connect the audiences from all backgrounds, as Stephanie mentioned? And please cite examples, he asks.
So it's nice to hear from Bob. Bob and I have known each other for a long time, and that is a very important question. Sort of building on what I said, right? It's important that our newsrooms reflect our communities. That's both on the air and behind the scenes. We have to have diversity, because we need voices in our editorial meetings that are heard. And that comes from managers, producers, writers, reporters. We have to create environments in which people can be heard, so that we are reflecting and doing stories and talking about issues that are happening in our communities already. So for me, it's building that kind of newsroom and being conscious of that with every hire. Are we reflecting the community in which we live? What are we missing? What voices do we not have in our newsroom? And being, frankly, brutally honest about it, and making sure that as we build our newsrooms, we're understanding that too.
I think part of what Bob is talking about is, how do you make sure that those voices in your newsroom are heard? What does that heard mean? I always tell in our newsroom, I have a young newsroom, to say, you got to step up and speak up and not be afraid to do so. So that's number one. But I also think it takes the leadership of the newsroom to make sure that we give that person's viewpoint attention and find value in what they're saying. And I think this has, been my lifelong work in the area of diversity, of making sure that people step up, no matter gender, race, age. I always like to use age these days, because I let the young staff tell me about something that's really groovy, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. They all go, what? So to make sure that they understand and how to integrate that information in our story. I live in a very unique market, because things of diversity are not as they are defined on the mainland. So our diversity questions always relate to, in our communities, is about Hawaiian community, a Native Hawaiian perspective, and not to forget that. So it comes even down to the trails we have in Hawaii. Why are they significant, and why are they called what they are? And how people in our community are extraordinarily upset at the disrespect of, let's say, tourists who come and mess around on the island, give us money for tourism, but at the same time trying to reflect the concern of the community, because those visitors that bring us dollars affect how our homes and our communities live. So I just think it's really behoovant, what's the word? Management has a responsibility. Leaders in your newsroom have a responsibility. Your producers have a responsibility to make sure those voices get heard. And sometimes, if we are, as Stephanie says, all the same, we went to school, we have degrees, and we all think alike, then we are going to take that minority view and not consider them. And it really takes a commitment to go, you know what, let's chase this aspect of a story that 3/4 of the room goes, no, I'm not interested. Because I always say we're not producing newscasts for ourselves. We're producing it for our community.
I'm going to piggyback off that, Janice, because we do have a question that I don't know who it's from, but this is an RSVP in an email, and it said, do large market newsrooms cover the same types of stories as smaller markets? How much airtime is devoted to national news versus local stories? And then they say, I am really wondering about Hawaii being off the mainland. Janice, is there a feeling you need to cover the West Coast as part of your local coverage?
I'm going to say it two ways, and I don't know if you guys will find this surprising. As somebody as a West Coaster who moved to Hawaii and not from here, there's some things that surprise me. Number one, no offense to the Bay Area, they don't care. They don't really care about San Francisco. They actually care about Los Angeles and that area, and they care about, take a breath, Las Vegas. Las Vegas is called the ninth island for a reason. Anytime you can do stories about Las Vegas, they get excited here. So we'll cover national news, but really our emphasis is indeed Hawaii. And as you know, as I said, we're 8 islands, so we have to travel to those islands to get stories. Thank God for technology allows us to have interviews and get interviews and images from the other islands to cover in our newscast. So same types of stories? Yes, same types of stories that I might have done when I was in the Bay Area. But to cover the West Coast, not that interesting. No offense. I wish it was, because I keep up with the Bay Area news. So I'm like, oh, you guys don't care. They really don't care. Even California's mask laws and Gavin Newsom recall, not interested.
What about anyone else on the panel? What are your thoughts?
I'll say, someone who went from a large market to a medium market, one of the adjustments for me was there's a lot more crime here in our DMA than we covered in San Francisco when I worked at ABC7. And our audience here expects us to cover it because it is very impactful in their communities. We can't just go and say, here's what happened, and then not do a follow-up. We have to put it into context. We have to follow up with the police chief and the police department and community organizations and see how it's impacting them and what they're doing in response, because it sort of comes in waves. And so, that has definitely been an adjustment coming back to a smaller market. But, I think that's just because we are in a smaller area, so to speak. There's a greater demand for local. And so, crime stories are hyper-local stories. You just have to make sure you're being fair and giving them the judicious time to put them in context.
I mean, I would say that, it's important to remember, I mean, we are a trusted source of local information, and that's what we work out of. And, having been in smaller market newsrooms and larger market newsrooms, I would say in some ways, maybe it's a little bit harder to do that really complete coverage in a larger market because you have a lot more communities. I mean, the DMA that I'm in Sacramento is huge. It's 2.5 hours across. It's 3 hours north to south. Those are a lot of different counties that we're covering, a lot of different cities, a lot of different issues and what we're always looking for is how can one thing resonate elsewhere. And those are really important stories to be able to tell and to really jam our newscast full of as much local information as we can. National news has a place because, again, we're that trusted source. So our audience does want to know what are the important things that are happening, what's relevant. But primarily, I mean, I'm going to put my eggs in the basket of how can we really tell some great local stories.
Thank you. So let's talk about this. Let's turn our attention to a question from a newer journalist, and this is from Michael Patterson, a NATIS member. He is an anchor reporter, and he says, what are the most important skills and traits you look for in an applicant from a smaller market looking to break into a medium or larger market?
I'll start with that. So for me, it's a couple of things. And thank you, Michael, for the question. Look, the number one thing I always start with is passion, right? You got to love what you do because these jobs are not easy. You know, we work very hard. We've been under fire as an industry for a while now. So you got to love what you do and be invested in telling good journalism. So that is certainly number one. Number two, you know, if you're a reporter and you want to get into a larger market from a medium market, show me how you enterprise stories. How do you get sources? How connected are you to your community? You know, what are you doing to deep dive into big issues in your community? How can you show me that you are able to understand what's important and tell good stories? So I would start with those two.
And this is such a great question, and you all have really worked your way up. If anyone's read your bios, you have been there and you really earned your way to the position that you're in. So I would really like to hear a response from all of you on this question, if okay. Maybe we'll go to Martin.
You know what I actually look at first is I look at their digital stories, and then I ask for scripts from those stories because I want to see how good of a writer you are. And see what we're getting. You know, we can teach people to be better writers, but you know, obviously, if you're a great writer, you're going to stand out, and that's going to make you put you at the front of the line. Because I think that's often a forgotten skill, sadly, because you know the best writers are really the best journalists. I mean, writing is such a fundamental skill set in what we do, and if you can get the writing down, we can teach you everything else. But the writing is what I look at first.
Derek?
Yeah, you know, when I'm looking at candidates, the thing that you can't teach is passion and tenacity and curiosity. If you have those things, you know, to Martin's point, you want to have a good writing foundation, but we can help you grow as a writer. We can help you grow as an on-camera presenter. We can help you with and continue to grow people in so many number of ways. But I can't teach you passion. I can't teach you to have that natural curiosity, to know that there's something to be skeptical of, the reason to ask a follow-up question. And those are the kinds of things that I think really help to set people apart. The other thing I will tell you that, you know, every year I'm in the industry, I hear less of a detailed answer of why do you want to work for this television station or this newsroom? And I would encourage everyone to, if you're going to apply somewhere, make sure you've done some research on it. Make sure you understand why you would want to work there and be ready to answer that question. Because if you don't have a good answer to that question, I don't know how I'm supposed to see you as someone who's going to move my newsroom forward.
Excellent response. Janice?
I just have to agree with everybody that passion to me is the number one word that I love to hear. If I had an applicant, another word that I'd like to look for is courage, that they're not afraid to pursue their curiosity. They're not afraid to ask the question. I don't want them to be punk about it, but I want them to have some kind of level of interest in what do I need to know. And I just think passion is the right word, and writing, of course, is the first thing that I look at. My market's pretty small, so I don't have a lot of people coming here for experience, and their answer of why do you want to come to Hawaii, you can imagine what the answer is. So I kind of can't use that totally as a good screening question. But it does give me a little bit of insight of their motive. If their motive is to come to have a vacation, I'm like, this is not a vacation. This is called work. And so I always kind of start out with that. Journalism is hard work. And if somebody has passion to do it, they will succeed and they will go to big market.
Preach, Janice. So we're talking about hiring and the skills, you know, needed and required. And this kind of takes me to this question. Somebody asked, during this pandemic, have you had staff leave? We know this has been an issue in markets across the country. People are just difficult to find, those hard workers, the dedicated ones that are willing to go the long distance. What are the causes, and can you speak to the difficulty of finding highly skilled replacements, they ask?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I'll lead it off. I mean, yeah, of course. This certainly the pandemic has reinforced that this is not a career for everyone, and I think as an industry we have all learned more compassion. I mean, I will tell you that when I started in television, it was a very different kind of industry, and I think it's improved for the better. I think we have a ways to go in terms of continuing to move our industry forward. You know, there's no perfect work-life balance in television, and that has been a deal breaker for some people. And I've been as supportive as I can for people who are looking to move on. I also would say, though, to anyone that when you look around, I don't know that there has been, you know, a moment in time for a good chunk of time where you can really look at the work we're doing on a daily basis and say, this is really connecting with people, that people are tuning in because they want to know the latest numbers, what's happening, what's closing, what's opening. We have that really direct connection with the audience. And for people who want to do this, like, jump in, because we have a really great moment to continue to foster that relationship with our audience in a way that hasn't existed in a while. And if you look even back to 2018 or 2019 and thinking about what's the future of the industry and are we relevant and how do we make ourselves more relevant, I think we had a really important reset with that direct connection with the audience, and let's make sure we're continuing to move that forward. And there are people who are really excited about doing that. And I'm there and to help them grow and move forward and work on it together.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll tackle that. I definitely think we're seeing people leave us in the pandemic. We lost people. I mean, you know, going back to the start of the pandemic, we didn't know what we were dealing with. And we still had people out on the street doing stories. And, you know, my goal as a manager is to keep people safe, but still cover the community. It was tough, and it was tough on the crews out there. You know, so I definitely think our industry saw changes. I think where I am, Silicon Valley is a big competitor. I have, you know, these fantastic workers who love journalism, and, you know, they're getting courted in some ways to work for Silicon Valley, where, you know, look, if you're a journalist, you're never guaranteed to have Christmas off or Thanksgiving, or you might have to work nights, weekends, overnights. And I think there is, it's hard to sometimes compete with that and with what people are being paid outside of our industry. Our industry, you know, in general, if you're a producer, you're not making a lot of money, and that's tough. So I do think for us, it is about finding those people who really want to do this and maybe taking them and training them, looking for people who want to do this, who have some skills, and saying, okay, we're going to take a chance on you. Let's work with you to bring them up and get them trained for these jobs that we have, and we want to, you know, get skilled people in those jobs. But it's really looking at training from within.
So you mentioned pay in there, Stephanie. That this is another question that we have that I think, you know, many of you can speak to. So this question says, why doesn't the news industry pay competitively in the entry-level positions? Oftentimes, news jobs pay the same or less than jobs in the fast food industry, for example. Why does the world hold such high expectations of journalists yet pay them so little?
So, you know, I work in a large market, so it's a little bit different than it would be in entering a smaller market. We have increased, we've made a conscious effort to pay, especially producers, writers, more. So we're trying to fix the balance of that. That being said, it's still tough. You know, we've got to figure out how to right that balance. with keeping our budgets in line as, our linear, how much money we're making on linear simply declines. So it's something I think the entire industry is trying to figure out. But it's trying to find parity too for those that are coming in and making sure they're getting a livable wage. So it's a work in progress for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Stephanie said, and it's California is an expensive place to live, and certainly in the interview process, there are people who don't have California connections, and when they're weighing everything, aren't necessarily interested in coming to California. But I will tell you, just like Stephanie, it is a very active conversation. I've been able to move the needle, and I'm continuing to push it forward so that when someone is coming in to our newsroom, even in a more entry level, top 20 market position, that I do really feel like this is going to be a living wage for them, and we're continuing to move it forward. And I will tell you, the other component of that is getting people into the industry. And next year will be the first year at my station where we're going to have a paid diversity internship, because when you look at how do we get people into the industry, if you don't have the right socioeconomic setup to be able to pay for college, to be able to not have a summer off to go do an internship, it makes it that much harder to get into our industry. And we're really trying to tackle that and make this a more equitable industry to work in.
Has that become harder because of the pandemic budgets?
I think there's a reality that you have to understand about the business. There's a broadcast business versus broadcast news. Many stations have lost revenue in the times of pandemic. So when your station is losing 30% of revenue in the first year because of the pandemic, it happened so early in the year that it was hard to make up for that. At least that's the argument that I get, right? So we can argue that the company's not making as much money as they used to in that first year. So what can you do with wages? If you increase wages, you eat into profit or whatever. And so it's hard when Stephanie talks about a balance. So we're trying to create a balance. How much more money can I eke out of my company to give to the employees and encourage and give them product to sell? I always tell our newsroom that my job is to create the product. It's sales' job to sell it. And if I got to give them good stuff to sell, right? Quality stuff to sell. And it should come after, because you have to demonstrate that you're making quality, whatever widgets you're making, quality packages, quality shoes, whatever, and then you're going to come and buy it. So the reality of what business is like, sometimes it's hard to sell or explain to the new hire, right? They don't care about what the company's making. They think that all broadcast companies are really making dough. And unless your company is selling yourself, you kind of have the money that you make. So I'm in a company right now that is in the business of acquisition. So when that happens, if you think about your own life, if you're going to go out and buy another house, what is that going to do to your current household living? What are you not going to buy or sell? And so acquisition is always good for the industry because you think money goes round, but it means that those who are in the family right now kind of have to toe the line because they need to save that money to buy the next station. It's a strange, strange, strange industry. That's why I try to tell my staff, focus on the passion and why you're in the business. And that is what will continue to drive you in this business. As for salaries, yes, Hawaii is as expensive as San Francisco. So I've got to come up in wages all the time. And you bring in somebody brand new, give them way more money than I would have in a market my size, and they leave in 2 years. I have found that the young employees don't have lasting power. And maybe it's because I picked somebody who didn't have all the passion that requires that you can stick it out. So I think that salaries have to come up, but I do think there's some reality about that salary. And I think every news director I've talked to in the last year are all trying to move the needle and have successfully moved the needle, 1,000, 500, 2,000 if they could. I'm paying producers a lot more than I would pay normally.
Thank you. On the topic of, revenue, wages, salary, pay, I'm going to take it back to Devin Feely had a good question about this. He asked over the air on-air broadcasts pay the bills, right? No one disputes that. But as an industry, we have not done as good a job monetizing everything that we do online. But it sometimes seems that the online and social media aspects of our business have come to occupy a place of outsized importance in our newsrooms. Is it short-sighted to believe that we should focus on the things that actually make us money, or at the very least use social media as a way to steer viewers back to our broadcasts rather than viewing it as an end unto itself? Big question.
I'll take that one. It's sort of the chicken and the egg scenario, isn't it? Because, you do have a lot of, cord cutters, we have it in this market, I know certainly in the Bay Area, who just don't have linear television anymore. So you obviously want to cater to that audience. So you got to put your content on whatever platform they're at. Whether, for us, it's we're big on our so-called CTV app for, Roku, Apple TV. We also have to program for our website. We have to program for our phone app. So because if we don't do that, then there's the potential that audience or potential audience is going to go to a competitor who is programming for them. And, Devin's right. The revenue on those platforms is not anywhere near where it is on linear. But, there's the hope and the potential that it can catch up. And so, I think, we're going to have to balance that going forward for the next few years. And hopefully there will be more parity and more equity because I will say this, year to year, we are seeing more people on our digital platforms. Those are growing. And so I feel like we need to continue investing in them because that is where the audience is shifting.
Well, the overall shift in the go ahead, Stephanie.
Sorry, no, go ahead, Derek. Go.
I was gonna say, the overall shift in the industry, whether you're talking about the content side or the sales side to impressions, does level the playing field a little bit. There's a long way to go on that, but being able to track someone who's watching you on television or watching a newscast stream or catching that same stream on an app, mobile, that helps. That helps to create kind of a greater equity with all of those platforms. From a content side of things, going back to what Martin said, we have to be everywhere. We can't ignore one segment because the audience is everywhere, which is why, of course, television is still the biggest piece of what we're doing. But all those other places and having an app that's dynamic, that's a great place to visit. How many different television groups have an OTT platform? We have to be everywhere, and we have to continue to embrace that new technology. Because that's the evolution of what we're doing. The content, that foundation of telling those stories, letting people know what's going on, being there for breaking news, that's the really important commodity that we deliver on a daily basis. But will always be changing is how we do it.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I agree with everything that's been said. Devin, it's a great question, right? I do feel like, well, we all know linear is all of our biggest platforms still, 100%. But we're in that kind of great transition in many ways, right? So linear is still paying all the bills, but it's starting to do this, right? Here's digital, here's linear, and we're starting to we're not meeting, but they're moving in directions where we're going to meet each other in the middle. So you're right. We still absolutely have to pay attention to what's happening on linear. But we would be foolish to not think, okay, how are we going to grow these new platforms? And they're new platforms that feels like every 6 months that we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we reach people when they're not necessarily on our linear platform, they're coming to other places, especially younger audiences, right? That coveted 35 to 49-year-old, where they're cutting us off on TV, but they might see us here. So it is tough, and it's a battle to try and figure out, okay, how much attention do I pay to my biggest platform? Well, I know I got to find other people here as we sort of make those shifts in our industry, but it's absolutely tough.
Clearly we need to tie the social media, what we're doing on social media, to linear, and kind of vice versa. But I think that there are mistakes that we see, every day on stations that are not tying back their social announcement, if you will, and tying it back with a link or something to tie it back to what you're doing. So I know a lot of stations, I'm sure you guys do it too, is you say, hey, our news is going to start in 2 minutes, and making sure that those links always go back to your website to also make that happen. And then the website is also tied to linear. Make sense? I mean, this is a big marketing craziness that you kind of have to sell to your newsroom, why in the beginning social media posts are important. And if done wrong, you miss the opportunity to link to linear. But it's a pathway. It's a long, long pathway.
I'm curious from each of you, which social media platform is it? Is it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok? Which platform do you see the most traffic driven from to your website?
Facebook would be
for us by far.
Yeah.
Facebook for Martin, Facebook, Janice.
Yeah, it's Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, and consider it's Facebook and Instagram is Facebook. So add that up. That's a huge chunk of it.
Thank you. I'm going to go to a student question who's on YouTube. This is a question from YouTube from Susan Bradley, who asks, do you see a way for students to help fill the gap between experienced trained journalists and those not yet proven?
I'll take that one. Yes. But here's the thing. So in our newsroom, we've started a program where we bring in college students who we train, and we put them through a very special training program where we help them, we enhance their skills as much as we can. We have sent those students, once they've graduated, to smaller markets. We have friends in Bakersfield. We ship them off to Bakersfield, and I've hired them back after a couple of years where they can really learn and grow there. And that is, we're always looking for students. Bob Rucker has sent me a ton of wonderful students who really want to get in this business. And we try and give them some skills, help them maybe get other jobs, and then bring them back. Same thing with Cal for us in the Bay Area, Cal, San Jose State, San Francisco State. It's looking for, we have to grow students. It's our responsibility to help bring these students along. So that's something we've worked on internally. And, it's great to see these students do well and get started. So it definitely comes with training and all of that, but we have seen some success there for sure.
Anyone else want to take a jab at that one?
We've hired producers straight out of Fresno State, and they have been some of the best producers at this station. So absolutely, we need students who want to be in this business, who have that curiosity, who want to grow. And so absolutely, the pandemic was tough because we lost our intern program for, was it a year or 6 months or a year? I can't recall. But, that was our pipeline for producers and assignment editors. And so, we're now recovering because the intern program has resumed. But, it hurt us for a while because we didn't have that, pipeline that we normally have to fill those entry-level positions in this newsroom.
Yeah, that we saw that in a lot of markets as well. Let's talk about.
Can I add something about internships, though? I will say I am a product of becoming a producer because I was an intern. And I was not an intern to learn how to produce. I learned how to produce by observation, being in a newsroom, watching the producer. And years later, when I became a producer in a totally different station, they said, and the guy called and wanted me to share a package. And I shared a package and he said, don't I remember you? And I said, I'm a producer. And he's like, really? How'd you learn that? I said, from you. He had no idea what impact he had. So I think it's what's interesting to me is that the way students, from a student perspective, I'm going to say, take an internship as many as you can that always gives you something new to learn. Don't take an internship where you're going to do the same thing. Now, in these days, I don't know if people even have scripts anymore. But when I was at KTVU, we'd have interns that took care of the scripts. And they'd say, can I intern for a second semester? And I would tell them no, because I wanted to go somewhere else to another station in the Bay Area to see how it's done there. because everybody does it a different way, and that broadens your perspective. So that's some way a student can fill the gap in the experience. I will say that at our station in Hawaii, there's a program that would pay a student in the summer minimum wage for 20 hours. So I found money to supplement that, if you'll, grant and make an intern full-time in the summer, 40 hours a week. And then I extended her internship. And about 2 weeks ago, I gave her a full-time job as a producer. So you got to be there to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I would just add really briefly that, as an industry, I think we want to cast a wider net. There are so many, folks in college who have skills that translate to television and just might not know that it's what could be a really long career path. And so with an internship or shadowing or just making connections within different universities and getting a sense of what are the things that you like to do and what kind of positions could that translate into, can be really powerful. And someone can find their position in a newsroom and never have thought that would be where they would be.
I'm going to take it to this question because this kind of goes along with Janice. You were talking about how when you were an intern, that producer had no idea what impact they had on you. And this question, again, is from Devin Feely at KPIX. Great reporter, great questions, right? He asks, there are many types of reporters, the ones with great contacts and sources, the great writer and storyteller, the ones who excel in breaking news and live coverage. Finish the sentence for us. Quote, I can't imagine running a newsroom without a reporter like blank because of what he or she brings to the table, end quote. Be specific, give us a name, past or present, and explain why they were an invaluable asset to your newsroom. Who wants to go first?
Oh man, good question, Devin, but so many journalists. It's hard to pick one. Oh boy, man. Okay, I would say, so many. Damian Trujillo, who is somebody I work with now, and I worked with in the 90s at NBC Bay Area, who is grounded, connected to the community, passionate, cares about what he does, knows how to get sources, is an excellent newsroom citizen. So many. From ABC7, it would probably have been Vic Lee, who is the master, the king, as we all know, who was just who scooped everybody on everything and was the nicest human to work with. But so many other people, it's hard to just say one name. I mean, man, a lot of people.
Yes, thank you. Martin?
Oh gosh, I'm thinking of every reporter I've worked with over the last 15 years, and there's so many good ones. I have to give credit to Vic Lee. I'm glad Stephanie brought him up. He was just the master at everything he did and the nicest human being you will ever meet. So Vic was awesome. Wade Friedman, the most amazing writer and storyteller who's now enjoying his retirement. So honored to have worked with him. I worked a good chunk of my career in the Bay Area working the morning shift, and I worked with Amy Hollyfield. And, Amy can pivot from doing a fun World Series story to breaking news and telling you exactly what was happening behind her back and just, succinctly. And I loved working with her. Here in Fresno, I have to give credit to Maury Naylor. Worked with her at 2 stations. Here in Fresno, I was her assignment editor, and then at KTVU. And just one of the nicest human beings ever. So that's so one of the great things about this business is you connect with so many great people who then become your friends. And I'm honored to have worked with so many great reporters.
Derek?
Yeah, I will give you a name just because that's the premise of the question. One name that comes to mind for me is someone who's still in the industry, David Bienick, who was at Kcra and now is at our station in Boston. And listening to David in the newsroom work with, there are so many issues in California that are so complicated, whether you're talking about water rights or state government. And David has an incredible way of, doing an interview, being on the phone with someone and say, okay, that's great, but that's not going to make sense to anyone. So I need you to explain it again in a way that's going to make sense. And he just had such a way of disarming, public officials and bureaucrats and being able to really make the story about the issue and understanding it and just making sense of it. But I will tell you, when I watch stories for fun, because you end up watching something in the storytellers group on Facebook, and then you go down a rabbit hole of watching some excellent work. But there are elements of the best stories that I've watched that cannot be written, and it is a feeling that you have as a reporter that you get over time, and it is where the Nat Pop interrupts a track, where you leave a pause in the middle of the story. It can't be written, but when you have a really great relationship with a photographer, you can do work that is greater than what is on the page.
Janice?
Oh, I think I'll give a shout out actually to Don Sanchez, because I think that he's in your marketplace, and I just think that he is. You talk about being able to pivot. That man has pivoted and turned around and done pirouettes. I mean, he has done everything in the business and is entertaining, is thorough. I remember him during floods, some of the best storytelling possible. I also want to give a shout out to Lonnie Wong in Sacramento. Lonnie Wong and I worked together a zillion years ago, because he's been there for a zillion years and just retired. Also a recent Silver Circle person, and quite well deserving. He's grown his craft. He has become part of the community that made him so valuable to Channel 40 there. And no one can forget, or we should not forget, because they're not gone, is David Louis. He is not gone. He is still doing reports every day for KGO. Talk about resilience, talk about having to pivot your life, talk about, he's doing business, he's doing murder, he's doing whatever. He's kind of a Wayne Flavin in that way. So I really, having that broad knowledge makes you a better person. I think the most entertaining reporter I've ever worked with is here in Hawaii, who unfortunately last year passed away, Robert Kcra, who was very well known in this community and just so willing to be himself and make himself vulnerable for the viewers. And I think that that's a real testament to a reporter who's confident of what they do. And that's good lesson.
I'd also like to just add, if I can, anchors are reporters too. And I'm blessed to have two great main anchors in this newsroom, Warren Armstrong and Margot Kim, who really take their roles very seriously. They collaborate with our nightside team for the 11 o'clock day in, day out. They get out, they turn packages. I mean, we had the first anniversary of the Creek Fire in August. And so, we gave them time to go out and tell these in-depth stories about how the community is recovering 1 year later. And they were some of the best stories we've told this year. One story was 7 minutes from the 6 p.m. news list. And I was just proud of both of them. And they were so proud of those stories themselves. And just we're very lucky to have two anchors who aren't afraid to get on and get into the community and tell those stories. And I think that's really what sets good anchors from great anchors.
Yeah, you mentioned anchors are reporters too, and they're embedded in their communities. They come with a wealth of knowledge. Sometimes, years of being at a station, they can follow up on a story and really give broader context to it. But here's a good question that I don't know who submitted this, but the question is, many times veteran TV reporters in both small and large markets often feel their graying hair makes them easy targets for management cuts to meet budgets. Often, however, those years of rich experience make it possible for veterans to keenly identify key sources for ongoing issues that tap into deep concerns still troubling communities. Why not value veteran contributions with a newsroom advisory role that excites all news staffers and sends a clear signal to disappointed viewers that local TV news today does know what matters to them?
As one who has gray hair, I suppose I should speak first. It's a fair question. I understand the perception that this is what happens. I think there's more to the story often when we talk about age and ageism. And I'm not going to try to suggest it's not there. It is there. I think that sometimes in one's career, there's some realities about adaptation to the changing times, and the demands of the business. And sometimes the demands of the business is so great when you are, if you will, older, you don't want to live in those demands, whether that's hours or commitment to do things. I just think it's just, I suppose I resist the idea that age is the factor in staying on the job.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I disagree with the premise of the question. If there are some reporters out there and they would like to come work at Kcra for the next 30 years, I am very happy to have you. You cannot replace the knowledge that you gain in the community over time. And I've been really fortunate to work with veteran reporters who have retired from Kcra, and you can see that as newer reporters come in, that they are, fostering their development. They're helping them make connections in the community. They're helping them understand the context of an issue over time, and that is incredibly valuable. Same with an anchor team. The more veterans you can have in a newsroom, the better. The unsung heroes, you talk about veteran reporters, veteran photographers. I mean, they know the streets intimately of what's going on and where it's happening and who to talk to, and so many different connections. So I would tell you that, I'm sure it exists some places, but in my newsroom, veterans are very well appreciated.
I would agree with that too. I mean, and even with anchors, I feel where I work, I'm incredibly lucky to have Jessica Geary, Raj Mathai, Laura Garcia, Mike Inouye, the list goes on and on. Cheryl Hurd, all these people that have been in the market. I mean, the list goes on and on for 20, 30 years. I think there is incredible value to that. I would love to tie them down so they go nowhere ever. I mean, I think that is absolutely important. For a long time, the Bay Area was a destination.
Down so they go nowhere ever. I mean, I think that is.
Oh, I'm hearing myself. Okay. So I don't know what's going on. So I agree with Derek. I don't think there is no resistance on our part to having veteran reporters, anchors, staff. It's critical. It's critical to our success, 100%.
I'll just add, hiring and screening and doing interviews takes so much of our time. If we never had to do that, I mean, we could do other things. So, I mean, I would love it if my reporters never wanted to leave. They're all great, and I love them. And, the reality is we're a media market. Some of them want to go on to larger markets, and I think that's great if they want to pursue that. But I love it when a reporter comes to this newsroom and decides to make this place their home and wants to grow their career and their personal life here. And we need more of that.
Let's talk about social media. I have a question coming in on YouTube from someone who asks, are any of you feeding platforms like Instagram and TikTok, or are you pushing your content solely to your apps? Anybody using TikTok?
We're not on TikTok. We're on Instagram now.
Yeah, we're on TikTok. Oh, go ahead.
How is that working for you?
I would say we're still figuring it out. It's every platform that we have has a little bit different role. So you have the app, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and each the approach to the content on each one is different. TikTok's definitely been the one that I would say is it's try to put one at the lowest on the list. It's the least important platform to us at the moment, but it does have a reach. There is an interest in information there. I think probably the hardest part is figuring out the algorithm of how to actually make a local connection on TikTok. It's much more broad. So, the Washington Post, NBC News, some of the other networks, they have some pretty broad connections that they've been able to make on TikTok. But finding a way to make that a local connection is a little bit harder. So work in progress.
Yeah, and the videos that do well on TikTok are like the 15-second videos. So how do you tell a really good accountability story in 15 seconds? It's finding how to bridge that gap. And you mentioned earlier, Derek, about someone who is talented at disarming public officials, and that got me thinking. Do any of you find that type of journalism, that type of go after accountability journalism is dying with the newer reporters that are coming in, just because of the way social media is set up, that it's more of, the instant gratification, what excites you, and not the digging deeper into those social issues?
I would say accountability is 100% still important. It's what we do. And if we don't hold the powerful accountable, then we haven't done our jobs. I will say it's getting harder on journalists who are being trolled, or being talked about because of who they are, and being picked apart. I think it's harder on journalists because, we have to have tough skins, and it's hard to sometimes defend yourself. But absolutely, holding the powerful accountable hasn't changed. That's what separates us, I think, from everybody else who says they're journalists or want to be journalists.
Yeah. Do you find a lot that reporters who apply, or people that apply for reporting positions that are, in the newer stages of their careers are, well, actually, before I get to that question, I'm going to take it back because you mentioned getting trolled. I do have a question here that says, what do you tell your on-air talent when they get trolled by cyber bullies on social media? With the requirement of being on social media being a constant part of the job, does your talent ever feel overexposed? And how do you guide them in those scenarios?
I mean, I direct our anchors and reporters to be authentic on their social media platforms and to share what they feel comfortable. There are some people who feel okay with sharing, some photos of the family and what they've been doing over the weekend. There are others who don't want to go there and they really want to focus on telling the story of the content or showing a little bit behind the scenes. And it's really important to me that our talent on social media feel comfortable with the relationship that they have on social media. Trolling happens, and I generally advise them not to engage. There definitely have been points, and I think looking across the industry where the trolling is so severe that it does require some intervention. But that's where where I can jump in rather than having an anchor have to be going back and forth with somebody. And that is an unfortunate part of kind of the changing connection that people just feel so comfortable at the anonymity of social media in saying things that you would hope someone would never say in a face-to-face interaction.
I think that's the biggest thing that Jarek brought up. It has to be authentic. This actually came up in an interview yesterday. A reporter candidate asked what the expectation was for social media and what platforms. And I told her it needs to be authentic to your voice and what you're comfortable with. It'd be great if you wanted to post on every platform. I mean, I would not say no to that, but the reality is people have their favorite platform. I have anchors and reporters who prefer Facebook over Twitter and vice versa. And so, social media only works if you're authentic to your voice and what you're comfortable with. And so I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind as we're giving guidance to our teams.
I think I worry more about people who might get trolled. I have a staff who loves to be on social media. They will, I don't have to encourage it. They want to be there. And sometimes I go, don't you think you went a little bit too far with this comment or what you're revealing about your home life? I just go, it's up to you, but be very careful about what you do. So I always feel I have to kind of, counsel with them in the reverse. Don't say too much because you don't know who's going to see your stuff. It's very dangerous, I think. It's a two-way street.
Do any of you regulate what your reporters post on their professional pages on social media? This is a question. How would you address political posts by talent who represent your station?
Look, I think no matter if you're a journalist, if you're a journalist, you always represent the community. You always represent our company, and your credibility is number one, right? So if we are editorializing on social media, then your credibility comes into question. So I do think it is a very, our journalists have to be incredibly careful about what they post. Absolutely.
How do you regulate that?
Well, for us, when any journalist starts, we sit them down and talk about. We have a very detailed guide. Hey, remember, you know, this is what you need to do. These are our rules, you know, so they understand the expectation when they start. So it's not a surprise to them ever. But they are journalists. Again, what separates us from everybody else is our credibility. If we don't have credibility, we have nothing. So I think, you know, I've never gotten pushback on that, I'll be honest, and sitting down with every new hire saying, okay, here are our social media guidelines. Let's talk them through. Here's our racial justice and news coverage guidelines. Let's talk about these. And, you know, I think that there is a really good understanding of that and why it's so important to be careful.
Have you ever come into this scenario where you've had that discussion, you make the hire, and then they've been there for so long and they've gotten comfortable and then they post on social media? In that case, have you ever had that come up?
In terms of a political statement?
Mm-hmm.
No, not really. I mean, there have been a couple of times when I'm like, hey, I think you should take that down. I think, you know, maybe you didn't mean it in a certain way, but it's coming off as this. So let's take that down. And it's usually a discussion. And it's never, at least in my experience, I've never had somebody say, absolutely not, I refuse. Yeah.
Yeah, when we have a social media policy. I think we find those moments to be able to reiterate it when, you know, it's election season, and you know, just you're giving those reminders, and that way, whether you're fairly new or you've been there for decades, just setting the table again and you know, reinforcing that you do represent our brand, the television station, and you know, and you're a journalist. So let's make sure that regardless of where you're posting and without really defining it, I mean, you know, it's whether it's a personal page, professional page, or, you know, something that's in between, but just, you know, remember that you should be speaking with that credibility in mind, and don't put yourself or us in a position where it starts to question, you know, the credibility of the work that you're doing on a daily basis, the really important work.
Speaking of credibility, we have a question that came in with the RSVPs. The question is, does the term fake news really upset you? Has there been added pressure lately to make sure you get the stories right? For example, has the Donald Trump era changed the way you frame stories? Wondering if the term fake news has changed how you deliver newscasts.
The term fake news is, yes, very upsetting to me as a journalist. It calls into question of what I do every day and who I think I am as a journalist. I won't say it's changed the way that we've done things at all, because our standard is to do truth and to find the truth and give context and balance. So, you know, it's the same mantra that I've done before Trump, pre-Trump, and post-Trump, which is tell the story and make sure we give context to it. Make sure where is the other side? Did we work hard enough to make sure different perspectives are in the story? So I don't want to say that we've changed anything in our newscast. Not labeled anything different. Is news. We do get attacked because fake news. And yes, I personally take offense to it as a journalist.
Thank you, Janice. Anyone else have an opinion on that term, fake news?
In some ways, I feel like fake news is the evolution of the kind of generic term, the media. So it's something we've all been dealing with for the longest time, and you know, perhaps there is a greater skepticism of the work that we're doing on a daily basis. I would say, if anything, one thing that has just been evolving for us is really thinking about the measure of transparency that we can include in our coverage of a story. And, you know, perhaps there was in the past, you know, if someone wasn't going to say something or we couldn't get an answer or a statement, and you want to be all buttoned up about it, like, what are we supposed to say? We just have to leave that out. And there definitely have been points for any number of reasons where there are stories where we've called today, we've called yesterday, we're going to call again tomorrow, and we don't have an answer yet, but we're going to keep working on it for you. And I think finding ways to bring the audience more into the fold of what we're doing and how we're doing it is the way that we're going to continue to to build trust, that we aren't leaving things out. When someone says, why didn't you ask about this, or why didn't you? Well, we did. And just including that in the coverage, that we tried to ask about this, or we were unable to ask about this, or, we tried to dial into a news conference, but they didn't call on us, things like that. I mean, there has been some changes in the course of COVID that I think have allowed us to just be a little bit more, developed with the audience and what we can share about how we're trying to get information.
Yeah, we see that in our market too. You mentioned COVID and doing things differently. There's a question here that's asked, as we near the end of the COVID pandemic era of news production, what are the lessons? What will you no longer do, but maybe more importantly, what will you carry over?
I never thought that we'd be able to produce news from home. I never thought that we'd be able to have reporters working from home. We now know we can do that. So certainly, those workflows that we've learned about getting people home, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to utilize that in a post-pandemic world, because it gives us greater flexibility to cover the news. That being said, it's balancing that flexibility with still wanting people in the newsroom, because breaking news might happen, the face-to-face communication, building the camaraderie of everyone being in a newsroom, those are things that are still valuable. And so it's definitely a conversation we're having as we, figure out a post-pandemic world where do we find the balance between the greater flexibility of being at home, but, still wanting to have a full newsroom at our disposal to cover news the way we've always covered it.
Yeah, we saw a lot of folks pivot in the pandemic. I'd like to hear from maybe each of you on something unique that you did during the pandemic to bring the news to the public that you might keep.
What the pandemic taught me in living on islands is that the audience is willing to accept, if you will, a Zoom thing like we're doing now. So what we ended up doing, that I'm going to keep going, is one of our weekend meteorologists is not in Honolulu. She lives in Maui, and she does her weathercast from Maui. And we're the only station that has a Maui person doing weather. And as you know, this is an island, so we could be out in different places and we get to see Maui, but we're normally in a studio. So that's going to be a takeover. I think one of the things as a manager, though, to go back to something that Stephanie said, was about the takeaway of COVID for me as a manager is about compassion. That COVID created craziness, I think, in our communities and in our newsroom. And I don't know how many of you have had cases of COVID in your newsroom, but also I have, and it really brings out the compassion for somebody that they need to have 10 days off. And that's a pain when someone else is sick for whatever other reason. And the other thing is to talk about teamwork. So I talk a lot about that you're not on a team, you're about teamwork. And that is when somebody is sick on COVID, we're going to all gather together and cover for each other. So while, your staff is feeling, oh, I've got to work a 6th day, it's such long hours, we don't have enough resources. That's all about teamwork. And we're all together in it. We're fighting COVID, if you will, together. That's my takeaway.
I really appreciate how quickly everyone, as a society, gained this comfort with Zoom or some equivalent technology. I remember trying to get people to figure out how to do FaceTime and Skype for interviews when they couldn't do something in person, and it was a nightmare to try to figure it out with people before the pandemic. And now you pretty much can talk to anyone, and they either have it or they can quickly do it. So that has made the world smaller. It's made it easier to be able to do an interview with someone in LA today, or somewhere even anywhere across the country. It doesn't replace the connection of being able to go out and do in-person work when we can. And so I think in some ways we have to kind of push back a little bit to that and find those opportunities to actually go out and do field interviews and meet with someone, because there's a storytelling aspect that you just can't get through a screen like this. But the other thing that I think you weren't sure when everyone was so far apart or spaced out and you were managing how many people were in the building at a given moment. You can get the work done but when you see people back together in the same room again, the teamwork is there's no way to recreate that when people are not together. I think it's the nature of doing the work we do. There's an energy in the room. There's nothing quite like getting to hear the murmur of the scanners and an assignment editor who's getting excited and producers who are getting excited and getting on television. There's nothing like that. And there's no way to recreate that when we're not all together. So that was a huge takeaway for me of just how important that camaraderie and teamwork is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I miss seeing people in person. We are not 100% back in our newsroom, and it's hard. It's, I miss seeing people who are walking over to their desk, go, "How you doing? What's going on?" That sort of thing. That's been difficult. And that's been, I think as Derek was saying, I miss that collaboration piece when you actually get to see people face to face. On the flip side of that, like Janice said, the technology, and Martin said, we can do things now and things are more acceptable, like Zoom interviews and StreamYard and all of that. That's certainly helped our industry change. And I think for us in the end, we've become much more flexible. When someone says, "Hey, whatever, I need to be with my kids this day. Is it okay if I work from home?" It's like, okay, you can do that. Whereas I think before, we would not have been as flexible, but we've learned that lesson from COVID for sure.
So many lessons. How did you each inspire your news teams when we hit that shelter in place and when we hit that moment of crisis? When everybody was dealing with their own personal things at home and still having to show up as, essentially a first responder at work and delivering this critical, important, life-saving information to the public. How did you inspire them to do the work when they were also going through it themselves?
I'll give kudos to my boss, Stacey Owen, who, look, it was none of us knew what we were facing. I mean, I remember at the beginning stages of COVID, it was like, what's going to give you COVID? We didn't really know. It was scary for all of us. And I think we were all trying to find our way. But my boss did a very simple thing that I feel like works and does it to this day. And she has a weekly meeting with the entire staff on Microsoft Teams. And we would talk about what we knew and answer questions and try and be as transparent as possible and hear concerns and try and figure things out. I think, at least from my perspective, I thought that that kind of helped bring us together, or maybe at times make people feel a little better, or at least connected, because they weren't able to come in the building anymore and they were off on their own island at home or still reporting. I do think that helped. I don't know if it was inspiring, but I think it was helpful, absolutely, to the team.
Anyone else?
We really focused on the connection. And I remember right at the beginning as a management group, and we figured, okay, we're divided in half, and I'm only going to see 4 of you for as long as this takes. But we were really conscious in talking about, we need to make sure that we're dividing and conquering the staff, and that we're all having a direct connection with people we're not going to see as often, and picking up the phone and calling as many people as I could over the course of the pandemic, and which is the news director's calling, is something wrong and what's going on? It's just calling to see how you're doing. And that's, I think that's a takeaway now, is it's the hallway conversations are great, but being really deliberate about having a connection within each individual on the team and the whole team is really important.
I had the unique situation of starting this job during the middle of the pandemic. It was July 2020. And so, as I would have done anyway, starting a job as news director, I wanted to do one-on-ones with everyone. And so I think that helped facilitate a connection in the beginning, because I was doing my one-on-ones. A lot of them were over Zoom. And so it allowed me to just have that introduction to the team and then hear their concerns and what was worrying them. The funny thing, though, was it took about 6 months. Even I think the last person I finally met was earlier this year, before I finally met everyone in person, which just, when you think about it, it was like, wow, I had been here for a year before I fully met everyone on my team.
It's crazy times for sure. All right, I'm going to take it to another question from Professor Bob. Professor Bob says, this is a good one. Number 3, Professor Bob Rucker, the framing of political views or news as conservative or liberal focused has over time helped to sour audience interest in trusting government and TV journalism. At one time, this industry actually worked hard to stop identifying race in police stories. Why don't TV news writers demonstrate that same determination with these two subjective perspectives in news copy stories or package reports and prioritize divorcing these toxic labels in an overt effort to help audiences learn to hear and care about different viewpoints?
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
I would say on the political aspect of it, I mean, I think within our coverage, we talk a lot about how are we going to get beyond the shouting voices, and that can be, a Republican Democratic issue, that could be a for or against, that can be a protest, it can be a rally on the Capitol steps. We really spend a lot of time talking about how are we going to get this down to the level of talking about the people who are affected and getting answers about, from the relevant, folks that are involved in the discussion, the debate, or what's ultimately going to happen. But we really try to frame it based on the effect and the impact, because that's really what resonates. And that's what you need to know is if this goes forward, this is what will happen. And this is what this means to this individual and this person. And rarely is there a consensus on there, but I think we also try to really talk about that we don't try to simplify issues into a two sides kind of a debate, because there are very few issues where it is as simple as that. And television, I think, has had a bit of that stigma over time of it's this side versus this side, and so that's just one of the aspects that we really try to focus on is getting beyond that.
Thank you. That kind of brings us to this question, and I probably only have time for 2 or 3 more questions before we have to wrap here, but this goes along that topic. Someone asks, what measures, if any, does your newsroom take to avoid a reporter or anchor's personal opinion from getting airtime? One newsroom limits the wearing of blue and red on election day.
We have a point manager system. So, every reporter script that goes on air has to be reviewed by a manager, whether it's me, our assignment manager, our executive producers, even our digital EP jumps in. And, that's just so we can have that extra set of eyes. So we've built in that review process. That way we can make sure nothing gets on TV or online without approval first.
Script checking, second set of eyes, Stephanie?
Yeah, and just for us, it's that continued training. We do legal and standards training about every 12 to 18 months. That is really interactive and deep and talks about the importance of how we write and report, because it's it has to be continuous training. We can't just set it and forget it. So that has become very important in keeping our standards at a certain level, certainly. And like Martin said, having checks and balances in the newsroom is important too.
What do you do if you have a talent on the desk that just says what their opinion is without, being in a script?
Well, haven't had that happen. Again, for me, it's the training. And so that hasn't happened. I have that situation when someone has given an opinion, certainly a political one, on the air just because. That's not what we do. We are local news, and we try and be as transparent and fair as possible. So I haven't had that experience, not yet anyway.
Yeah, we just try to set. Oh, go ahead, Janice.
No, go ahead, Derek.
So we just try to set really clear expectations, which, it comes up from story to story. We can have a really good discussion in the newsroom about what we are including, what we're not including. why we would say this and not that, and ultimately we get to a point, and then we make a decision with what's fair, what's reflective of what we know and how we know it, and not opinion, and that's what we go with, because we want to present the information and let the audience decide. And so I really appreciate having great newsroom discussions about stories. And when we make a decision, that's what we're going with. And I think everyone on the team, having that expectation that, okay, I'm on board with this, that's just really important within our newsroom.
To Stephanie's point about training, so you do want to have the training up front, and then it is continuous, whether it's every 12 months or every discussion. I like to have them as we're doing our editorial meetings, because I like those robust meetings that Derek talked about. You want to hear from everybody. And then in that discussion, help direct to say, oh, that's opinion. Should that be on the air? Should that not be? But I have not ever in my career so far had anybody go on the air and tell us their opinion. What I can say is that when anchors are on the air, they kind of take over. So if that were to happen, I'd say, okay, you have a First Amendment right. You don't have a right to do it on our air. So I'd never like to get in the way of anybody's personal opinion, but they also have to understand what they're jeopardizing as a journalist. And that will be conversation. Let's put it this way. We'll do a conversation after, for sure.
Thanks, Janice. All right, here's my last question. And we can leave our viewers, our participants, our audience, whatever we would like to call everyone who's here with us today, with something inspiring, maybe a little bit positive. And the question is this: was there ever a time in your career where you felt you weren't good enough or smart enough? Has anyone in news ever told you that the job wasn't for you? And if so, how did you overcome it? The self-doubt in this harsh and competitive line of work, how did you overcome it?
I'll do it as a funny. An old boyfriend when I was a young, before I really started my career, told me that I didn't have what it takes to be in this business. So I guess I have look at where I am today, and I've been in this business for over almost 30 years. So I think I have what it takes. And so it just means that this is what I wanted to do. I've had opportunity to get out of this business. I just realized every time that opportunity came up, I don't want to get out. I love television news. I love broadcasting. So I have the passion, and it's the passion that's kept me in the line of work.
I've had both of those experiences. So I when I was a producer, I had a news director who saw something in me that I didn't know if I saw in myself at that moment to become an executive producer, and really thought about it and said, if the people around me think I can do this, why wouldn't I be successful? I'm going to have that support. And yes, I have pitched for jobs and didn't ultimately get them. And the takeaway for me was, all right, well, what can I do next? What can I add to be able to be in a successful position to take that jump? And again, fortunately, I had the right people surrounding me who said, "Yeah, we're gonna support you, and we're going to give you those skills, that training, and make sure that you're ready to take that next jump." And that and many other things have crafted the manager that I am today, and the people that I seek on my management team and the hires that I make, because I want my number one goal is to help people be successful. And to be able to take the next jump, take on a bigger role, grow to a bigger newsroom, and continue to grow in this industry. And so when I can do that and use myself as an example of, look, I had great support, and I want to be that support for you. That's how we move people.
Well said. Martin?
I will just say, all those times I applied for jobs and I didn't get them, it just made me want to work even harder. I remember when I was on the assignment desk here in Fresno when I was 21, 22, and I quickly realized that producing is the path I wanted to take. They allowed me to fill in. I had some terrible shows. I mean, just like real bombs. But I learned from them, and they ended up hiring. There were some openings. They hired more experienced people. But that just drove me to want to even work harder. And eventually I did get my shot. And the same thing when I ended up going up to the Bay Area, and remember applying for a management job the first time and I didn't get it. And, obviously you're disappointed and I just looked at it as an opportunity. Okay, well, I didn't get it this time. What can I do to get it next time? And so the next time there was an opportunity, I was that person who was at the front of the line saying, I want to be considered again. And so I would just say to anyone who's going through that, look at it as an opportunity to better your skills and work harder, and your time will come.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I have not gotten jobs I wanted. I think it's been sometimes very difficult, and like Martin said, you just got to pick yourself up off the floor sometimes and believe in yourself. That being said, I also have been incredibly lucky to have some great mentors who I've turned to for help in my career, from when I was a producer or on the assignment desk, who have given me good advice, sometimes brutal advice, like, yeah, you kind of suck in this area, so work on that. And it is being able to, it took a long time for me to be able to hear that critical feedback and go, oh, okay, maybe they're right. I should work on that, so that next time when the opportunity comes, I'll be better at it. But, my advice too, for anybody, especially new into the business, find a mentor, find somebody that can give you good advice and tell you where you need to work on stuff, and then listen to it, because everybody has stuff to work on. And I think that's sort of the secret sauce, or at least helped me along the way, was going, okay, they're right. But thank you for supporting me and keeping me going.
Thank you so much. And it's 1:27. I wish we had more time. It's been such an amazing, enlightening discussion. But of course, I know you're all busy and we do have to wrap it up. But again, I just wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to be of service to our chapter today. Stephanie Adrouny, Derek Schnell, Martin Ortiz, Janice, Jen, thank you for being here. And Stephanie, you mentioned, mentorship, and we're going to talk about that in our membership slide. If we could bring that up, I do want to tell our participants a little bit about our member benefits. If you enjoyed this member benefit, this News Directors Roundtable and other events like it, we do encourage everyone to share our website, MESF TV, with your colleagues. We offer a range of activities to enhance your professional skills, your networking circle, everything from reduced rates to entering your work in the Emmy Awards and attending the Emmy Gala ceremony in the spring. To free networking events. We've got educational workshops, exclusive tours of industry facilities, plus the fantastic mentor match program. I cannot speak highly enough about this. This is where you can get a mentor, or you can be a mentor. There truly is nothing more rewarding than sharing your valuable knowledge and giving back to the industry that you serve and that has served you. And then here on your screen, we've got upcoming events. We want to remind you about those. On November 13th, we'll have our virtual gold and silver circle induction, where we'll get to see Stephanie Adrouny again. And on December 1st, the call for Emmy entries will be posted, and the deadline to submit is January 14th. And then, of course, you're invited to our gala celebrating the 51st Northern California Emmy Awards later in the year on June 11th. And don't forget about the November 6th Meet the Scholarship Recipients presentation as well. We've got all this info up for you on our website. And finally, before we sign off, I do want to send it over to our chapter president, Randy Forsman, for some final words.
Hi, thank you, Nazy. I want to thank our panelists for taking the time out of their day today to share their professional insights with our members. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. And most of all, thank you to all of our members who joined us today. I hope you found this program as compelling as I did. This has been one of the many virtual programs that our chapter has produced over the last year or so as a benefit to our members. Initially, this was a way to continue to hold programs during the pandemic, but we've been so successful that we'll take what we've learned and continue to hold virtual events in some form for our members in the future. There's no substitution for a face-to-face event, obviously, but virtual events can ensure that we can reach members all over our chapter, from the Bay Area to Fresno, Reno to Sacramento, Eureka, Chico, Salinas, Hawaii, and even Guam. Now, as Nazy said, don't forget, the call for entries opens on December 1st for our 51st annual Northern California Emmy Awards. And we hope you'll join us in person for the first time since 2019 at the Hilton San Francisco Union Square, June 11th, 2022. Finally, I want to thank Activities Programs Chair Steve Schlisky. our Governor David Machuca for directing this program today, San Francisco VP Kevin Wing, and our Executive Director Del Compton for making this event happen, as well as our entire Board of Governors. Now, stay tuned for many virtual events soon, and as always, check our website, emmysf.tv, for our calendar of upcoming events. Nazy, back to you.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, everyone who worked on this. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you all for attending the 2021 News Directors Roundtable. We sure appreciate it. Glad to have you here, and we will see you next time.